And our next and final commentator for today is Professor Rועי Kreitner from the Law Faculty at Tel Aviv University. Rועי is the director of the Berg Foundation Institute for Law and History at Tel Aviv University. He writes on the legal history of American capitalism, the history and theory of money, private law and political thought. Rועי, please.
Advertise Anat looking on Microsoft.
Thank you.
Wow. When I walked in, I thought, wow, this room is so much bigger than the room I expected, and there's so much less of a desk to sit around. It only gets worse when you get up to the podium. So I don't know how many of you have had the experience of speaking about books in front of an audience. I generally really like it. It's one of the things I like best about academia. But I often have this sense that the better the book, the harder it is to speak. And usually it even means that the more I like thinking about the book and writing what I'll say, the harder it is to say it in the end. And so today I think I'll stutter a little more than usual. And that's the stakes of the game. In any case, there's a contract, we have to say something, so here goes. So Anat's book takes us in on several levels, and I think one of the rare things about it, and you've already heard a bit, but it takes you in on a level of detail and sort of lushness of detail that is that's really beautiful. And at the same time, it is a book about concepts, and it's a book that there's a lot of conceptual abstraction, and it moves quickly among a few different theoretical registers. So people interested in theory, someone who wants to say, okay, what's the theoretical message, the takeaway of this book, is going to have a lot to chew on, and people who are interested in delving into the historical stories and looking at a certain kind of beauty in advertising will have lots to go on and be endlessly engaged. And in an ideal world, it would be sort of a foul to try to say something about the book only in one of these registers, because the way the book works is by turning that combination into something completely productive. So it's not a conceptual argument with some window dressing of nice images. It's a conceptual argument that builds by working not only with the images, but with the way words and images go together, and with the way. So that's a problem for me, because I won't work now with any of the details. So I'll talk about concepts and so take everything I said with a grain of salt, that it's not representative of a good reading of the book. To read the book well, you have to read the book. So there's a rich conceptual claim that drives the book, which is that legally supported disavowal of enchantment. If you want to say, what's the book about? It's about legally supported disavowal of enchantment. And the story goes, from the 1840s on, advertising explodes, as it were. It becomes ubiquitous, both surrounds people, and becomes economically and culturally important. And in the process, it generates cultural anxiety, because it appeals, advertising appeals at times unapologetically, to enchantment, to fantasy, to magical thinking, to transformative experiences. While the dominant culture is busy establishing disenchanted rationality as its master narrative. So advertising is a central cultural practice, part and parcel of the expansion of business, of consumerism, of urban environments. It threatens wherever it appears. News, art, and science must differentiate themselves from advertising, leading to an economy of appropriation and distance. On the one hand, advertising is accepted as legitimate, but on the other hand, it's constantly right? It's disavowed, denigrated, it's always subjected to a lowering of its status. And law is a central place where this rhetoric of disavowal is developed and established. Law becomes the language in which the threat of enchantment dissipates. Enchantment is in a way dismissed by presenting it as a remainder, a low form, parasitically, but almost harmlessly, tagging on to the valuable activity of the market. And ironically, eventually, one that can be left to the advertisers. So, aside from the fact that the way the claim is built is very engaging, including often very funny, the narrative is especially convincing, which is no small feat, because trying to make sense of the rise of advertising without dipping into conspiracy theories or their correlating theories of false consciousness is no mean trick. But the concrete analysis of how these various fields manage to come to terms with advertising, how they become comfortable, how they stop worrying, it remains so well grounded in the analysis of advertisements and the discourse around advertising that it's hard to resist. And much of the persuasive force, beyond Anat's gifts as a writer, lies in this methodological choice to pursue the history as this reception-based history that shows that while enchantment was pervasive, it was not a unidirectional force controlled or even acknowledged by advertisers, and enchantment depended on active involvement of advert readers with their own will to enchantment. Now, the way that argument generates so much power, for me, I think, is by showing over and over in widely divergent contexts how much advertising actually does work, but not because the populace is engaged in a resistance campaign against rationality, or even against disenchantment, but actually because people, as consumers, as city dwellers, as readers of newspapers, navigate the seemingly chaotic appeals to their attention, which are framed across the entire spectrum, from the hyper-rational to the deeply enchanted, with relative aplomb. The people themselves are not really worried about whether or not they're properly disenchanted. Cultural anxiety isn't really an anxiety of the masses. The masses are, first of all, pretty resilient and understand themselves as such, but rather an anxiety of people who are typically relatively elite people and who have serious stakes in advancement of a particular cultural form. So within the cultural elite, there are varying stakes, they're not always the same. Some groups are interested in bolstering their cultural authority, and others may be more interested, at least for some of the immediate conflicts, in short-term gains. Some have wider theories about the extent to which decision-making power should be dispersed or retained by the elite. And others have only more local stakes in particular conflicts. What the story succeeds in showing is that enchantment worked in various ways on consumers of advertisements. Such success had to be culturally digested, and law was an important locus for that process, and its mode of address was one of disavowal. And so I'd like to raise a question, which is, in a way, an extension of the argument about cultural digestion of advertisers' enchantment. Now, I say extension, I'm not absolutely sure what Anat will think about it, but the point of entry for this question is Anat's own extension of the argument from consumers to advertisers. So she writes, the uncomfortable position between enchantment and rationalism needed careful management. Not only in the stories told about consumers, but equally about advertising professionals themselves. Practitioners craved the respectability of rational experts, yet introduced the forbidden element of enchantment, supposedly rejected in capitalism, into the heart of the system. The question is what it means for enchantment to reside in the heart of the system. When Anat turns to economists who are trying to explain how the system works, there's an argument that includes Cameron Masterman and no less than Alfred Marshall, who raises concerns that advertising might be wasteful because it persuaded, but why is it wasteful? Because it persuaded people to buy things they were not conscious of wanting. Advertisers answered this charge by claiming that it was good to develop the consumer's desires beyond his elementary conscious wants. So actually, it's an information problem, and advertising is actually solving it. But in this framing, the specter of wastefulness seems relatively contained. The focus is still primarily on whether individual consumers will be able to act rationally. So, consumer rationality is obviously important, and important for economic theory. And it's fraught, because on one hand, it's based on the subjectivity of value, and at the same time, on a taming of the idiosyncrasy at the heart of value making. So people are supposed to differ in their values and valuations, but they're all supposed to function under the same kind of ends-means rationality that allows them to value commodities. And the reason that this is a problem for an issue, and a fraught issue for economic theory, is that when people shop and when they actually they make the price system by being willing to pay the price. And if they're doing that, then they're producing information that allows the marketplace to do its magic. That is, to route human effort into welfare enhancement. That is, to generate the way the market is supposed to, sort of self-interested but other-regarding behavior. So the price system is what's supposed to drive efficiency, and it's supposed to ensure that everyone's subjective value is recorded. And if consumers are not acting rationally, then that story is threatened, at least. So an enchanted consumer might threaten the price system. So if you're an economist who's interested in saying that the price system is good because it advances welfare, you're reliant on the idea that people are acting according to actual preferences. If their preferences are distorted by advertising, you might be worried about that. But you might be able to cabin that and say, well, no, actually, the things that people are calling distorted preferences are actually just tastes that eventually become part of their preference, right? That people like Enchantment the way they like fantasy movies. It's a taste for a kind of entertainment. And as an economist, you might not be too worried about that. But there may be an even deeper magic at work, which is beyond the consumer. And here, it's a question of to the extent to which the economy itself is an enchanted thing, how the market is magical, or how at least the justification for the market is something that is supposed to increase the welfare of all the participants, might actually work. So here's the idea in very short form. The market relies on a sort of magic trick, what some might call sleight of hand, but others have called the invisible hand, by which people are supposed to do the things that they consider for their own benefit, and mutual benefit is supposed to be the result. That seems like a story of good magic, and one that can be explained as long as people are as profit-seeking actually towards with social benefit. But what if it doesn't, and what if advertising is actually part of the gap between regular market activity with rational consumers? So let me take a quick shortcut through Thorsten Veblen's theory of business enterprise. In 1904, this is just before the end of the period in that studies, and just before the discussions among economists that she points to. So Veblen says the accepted version of how the market is working is no longer true. Why? Because corporations who are profit seekers are no longer like individuals who are profit seekers. Corporations are worried about their capitalization. They're worried about generating profit not by increasing production, but by capturing a larger share of sales. So they actually they're perfectly happy capturing a larger share of a smaller pie as long as their particular share is larger. How do they do that? One of the ways they do it is by developing goodwill. So there's a beautiful little quotation that Anat brings from the Advertiser's Review. The best asset of a business is a well-known trademark. Do you realize what it means? It means that the convolutions of thousands or millions of human brains, that trademark is indelibly impressed. You can't see it, but it is there, and it is property. You can capitalize it. And this, in a way, echoes precisely what Veblen worries about. He says, when the basis of capitalization is no longer productivity, but it's an ever-recurring valuation of a company's assets, tangible and intangible. And he says the nucleus of capitalization it concerns intangible assets, particularly its goodwill, its immaterial wealth, things that are not serviceable to the community, but only to their owners. So franchises, privileges, trademarks, brands, patent rights, copyrights, exclusive use of special processes guarded by the law of secrecy. He goes on, I'm going to cut out the rest of the quotation, but the point is that advertising is a way of, and especially the legal guarding of what you get through advertising, goodwill, or a brand, is a way of exerting a little bit of monopoly power, right? Each protection of a brand is actually protection of a monopoly. And it allows for, or encourages, or makes perfectly foreseeable economic activity that is geared not toward the social good. So think about the soap, the borax commercial advertisement. Borax is not giving people information that it's good to have soap, right? They're trying to take a share of a market that already exists, a market that's relatively inelastic. People will buy soap if they live in a culture where it's thought good to be a person who's used soap. So what they're trying to do is get a share of an already existing market. From the economic perspective, we should think, well, that advertising is only, whatever is spent on it is wasteful, because it's not increasing the size of the social pie. It's only worrying about who gets which part. So what Veblen is saying is, at the heart of thinking about advertising, we have an irrationality in terms of where the place of advertising is in the justification we have for markets. But that threat is not about the irrationality of consumers. Each of the players is acting rationally. He's just saying the story that we tell ourselves, the magic of the invisible hand, or the invisible sleight of hand, is this larger problem with the justification of markets. Advertisers' discourse, as well as legal discourse, perform this sleight of hand to make sure that story, the story we tell ourselves about the justification of markets, remains plausible, and in a way the focus on consumer rationality, or the threat to consumer rationality, helps us forget that the threat to economic rationality is actually structural rather than individual.